Alright, so it is episode 5 of the More Knowledge Show, coming to you live from a garage outside in Alabama. Today is Thursday, July 11th, 2019. Usually we record on Wednesdays, but this week was different. I did record yesterday, but the recording did not turn out very well, and so I decided to just record today. And once again, we are outside, so if you hear a lot of animal noises, that's because we are out in the nature. You know, it's important to go outside while you can, because who knows, 10 years from now, it may be dangerous to go outside. So try to take advantage of it. Do not just spend all the hours of your day staring at programming and computer things that are going to turn you into zombies that will eat each other alive. Anyway, so a lot has happened since I've had my last show. One thing notable is we had a jobs report, and we actually grew more jobs than expected. There was actually a lot more jobs grew than expected. And you know, when companies are hiring more, when more jobs are being created, this is usually a sign that, you know, you have a growing economy, that the economy is in a strong position, because when companies are expanding, they're adding jobs. If a company if their profits are declining, then most likely they're going to be cutting jobs, just like we've seen out of what's the name of that bank? The bank in Germany. They cut like 18,000 jobs. I know the name of the bank, I just can't pronounce the name. But yeah, they cut 18,000 jobs because, you know, their revenues are declining. They're barely profitable, and they're probably going to collapse. So the fact that we are adding more jobs than expected should be a good sign for the economy and the stock market. Now, there are a million other pieces of economic information that basically, you know, show that the economy still isn't really all that great, but the stock market did fall because of this. And the reason why it fell is because these improved jobs numbers lower the chance that the central bank was going to lower interest rates. And I think that really shows, like, the main theme of pretty much everything, the economy, everything the stock market is, how does it impact what the central bank is going to do? How does it impact monetary policy? And I think this is a bad thing, because really what the central bank does is create inflation. And if everything is about creating inflation, which inflation is about stealing your purchasing power, then you look at it, really everything is about stealing your wealth. So I don't think that's really that good of a, well, it's actually a terrible thing. But yeah, that's one thing that's pretty bad. But you know, another thing, while stocks did drop, stocks also recently hit all-time highs. They went from 2,000 to 3,000 within 5 years. And I think what this shows is that this idea that we've had no inflation is not true, because that rise in 5 years from the S&P 500 going from 2,000 to 3,000, hitting all-time highs, that was the inflation. It just has not shown in the rest of the economy, but it exists, and it can, and eventually will show it into the rest of the economy. So I think this whole idea that, you know, you can basically print as much money as you want, you can lower interest rates as far down as possible without having inflation, is not true. The inflation exists, it just doesn't exist in all the areas that is being recorded from the government's numbers. And I think, you know, and the move from 2,000 to 3,000 was not completely because of stimulus. You know, the corporations, there was growth, but what you saw was, you know, like 10 companies were responsible for like 1/3 of the increase in the stock prices. You know, it was a very small select few companies that were actually performing well over that 5-year stretch. So overall, it isn't really very much to celebrate. And, you know, and just a perfect indication that the market relied on continued easing was when we tried to normalize, um, when we tried to the quantitative tightening, when we tried to raise interest rates and get rid of all that stuff on the sheets. What ended up happening was the stock market nearly crashed. It nearly crashed. So then we had to hold everything on pause, and I think that really shows that, you know, you can't, when someone's a drug addict, you can't take the drug away from them, or they're going to go through a withdrawal period. But you know, the results of that period where they're feeling terrible is eventually they're going to not be hooked to drugs anymore, and that's kind of the thing you want, but nobody really wants to go through it. So you just got to keep on pumping up the markets to keep it going. And when this inflation comes into, when that rise from 2,000 to 3,000 in the stock market, all that inflation in the stock market, when it starts coming into consumer prices, that's when we're going to start seeing some serious problems. Because then, you know, the economy is going to be weakening regardless. So we're going to have rising inflation in the face of a weakening economy. So that's just something that I've seen, and that's probably going to happen. But another thing that's going on is that Jerome Powell, chairman of the central bank in the United States of America, he had a speech at Capitol Hill yesterday, and basically what he said was, he basically said the economy was weak, so we're going to lower interest rates, and the market celebrated that. So I guess a weak economy is now a good thing. And I think the main thing, like, when you have a stock market, what the stock market is supposed to reflect is the earnings growth potential of all these different corporations within the economy. So if earnings are expected to grow, that's going to be reflected by growing stock prices. That's why stock prices move up and down. But now we have a stock market that is not really determined by earnings or like any real measure of economic strength. Now we have a market where the stock prices are completely determined on monetary policy. So it's completely determined by the central bank. So if the central bank lowers interest rates, despite, you know, the chairman of the Federal Reserve literally went up there in Washington, D.C., basically said, he basically gave a million reasons for why the economy is not doing all that great. And then we took that as a positive. That is a sign that the way the market functions is extremely messed up. And what you're going to have is a big separation between the stock prices and the actual fundamental intrinsic like how much the company is actually worth. So, and then stuff like that is what leads to instability later on down the line. And another thing is, over time, every time they've lowered interest rates, the actual effect has been like, the effects have been, it's not as strong. You know, you cut from 5% to 2%. Yeah, you know, the effects can be strong, but then, you know, when you cut from here, it's not going to be as strong. Because you look at in Europe, they're all the way down to negative territory, and then you see over there, they're still not able to get anything. So it's going to get, the effects are going to become less and less over time, and then we're going to require more, and then overall, you know, it's going to be bad for the currency, it's going to be bad for our wealth, and it's going to lead to further financial instability in the stock market, because the stock market is being manipulated. When you have a stock market and a market in general that's completely determined by one group of individuals, these central banks, when you have a stock market that's determined by that, that's not a good thing, because you shouldn't hand this much power to a small group of people and then expect to have good results. Okay, like no one person or 10 people have the intelligence to be able to make these type of decisions, but we are in a market that's relying on 10 people to make decisions and to keep this thing going. And you know, another thing that people have been talking about is the Federal Reserve, their independence. You know, people are saying it's very important that the Federal Reserve remains independent. But what people need to understand, the Federal Reserve has never really been independent. I mean, this idea that you can just have an institution, you put some group of people, you give them basically power over the entire economy, and then you expect them to act in the interest of everyone, that's just unrealistic. I mean, if you just allow that to happen, they're going to have their interests. They're going to work for a certain group of people. They're going to help certain people out. That's just a fact. People are greedy, and people are going to do what people think is the best thing for themselves. And who is interested in the central bank? Well, all the other banks, they own the Federal Reserve. They have shares in the Federal Reserve. Every bank, every member bank owns shares in the Federal Reserve. So this idea that the Federal Reserve is just this independent institution designed to serve the people and protect the people's wealth and price stability, all of that is not true. It's never been true. And maybe people are starting to realize that. You know, maybe people are starting to realize the Federal Reserve is not independent. And when people do realize that, you know, people are going to lose trust in this system that people have been putting a lot of trust in for a long time. And that's kind of another big thing, which is trust. And that kind of leads me to my next point. So while I was gone, they conducted these stress tests on all these all these banks. They had a stress test basically to measure they saw their statements, all their information, and basically they said they ran a simulation. If we have a downturn and some of these assets just collapse or fail, are they capable of surviving? Is there enough cushion there to be able to survive? And of course they all passed pretty much, and then all their shares went up. They were able to return more capital back to shareholders. But another thing that came up is a central bank official basically said that that these stress tests, which are supposed to test the financial system. Okay, I still have trouble pronouncing certain words, but it's getting better. Anyway, so that's why I'm pausing a lot. But these stress tests are basically, he wants them to become easier. And they have been becoming easier, but he wants them to become even more easier. And it's pretty clear why they want it to become easier, because the financial system is not really that strong. It's getting weaker. And they're going to continue to need to make an easier stress test in order for people to remain confident. But the truth is, the stress test was never really a test. It was always it was always just propaganda to prop up these institutions and keep trust in them. Because let's remember once again, the central bank is owned by the banks. Okay, I don't know why it took me that long to say that, but the central banks are owned by the banks. So they're not going to turn around and do something to hurt the banks. If anything, they're going to save the banks. When the banks are in trouble, they're going to inject money into the system. They're going to constantly do things to make sure the banks are propped up and are in good condition. It's what they do. They're the lender of last resort. So if everyone loses confidence in the banks, they're the ones who are going to save them. But of course, while they're not saving them, they're always saving them. So they're not gonna. You can't expect an institution like the
like a central bank to be able to properly monitor the financial system, because they have a direct interest and connection with these banks. And another stat that I saw was in 2018, the exercise, the simulation that they did to basically test these banks, the combined net loss was just 0.7% of the bank's assets, and that was half of the net loss recorded in 2013. So basically, since 2013, the test has gotten much easier, and as we get farther from the financial crisis, people have kind of been tricked again. People now think that the financial system, it basically cannot collapse. We are indestructible, and people made the same mistake in 2007. I wasn't exactly very old in 2007, so I can't really say I remember what happened in 2007. But if you look back in 2007, people thought the financial system was pretty strong. And and then a lot of people say, well, if you look back and you look back at the banks, it was pretty obvious. Yeah, it's pretty easy to say something is pretty obviously, so something is going to obviously happen if you look back at it. Of course, in the moment, it's easy for people to just get tricked and then act like nothing bad could happen. But I mean, there is weakness in the financial. People say the financial system in America is very strong, but I mean, you look at Europe. Europe is pretty bad. The banks they're all cutting jobs because of the extremely low interest rates. Their profits are basically being destroyed. They have a lot of the European. It's a lot of problems in Europe, and let's remember, the financial system is very connected. If the banks in Europe fail, the American banks will also be impacted. So if we just look at it, from what's going on in the American system, it's not really a good way to look at it. And also, I don't think that these people can really even test properly, because they're not going to be able to admit, the only crisis that they're going to be able to predict is the crisis off of something that we've already seen. They're not going to be able to analyze or model in a crisis that hasn't even been seen before. And each crisis is something new. It started for a new reason, and it's different in how it affects the economy. So to be able to say you're going to be able to predict that, they're predicting that, and a lot of people think in the next crisis we're going to have low inflation. Some people say we're going to have high inflation. Some people say we're going to have no inflation. It's like the prices are going to fall. So there's a million different things that can happen, but that's a pretty hard game to play, predicting what exactly is going to happen when the crisis happens. But what you can see is that there are issues in the structure that makes it unsustainable. So I can't sit here and tell you when something's going to happen, but I can tell you this: the stress test is not a real test. It is simply propaganda to prop up the big financial institutions to keep people confident in them. Because when people lose confidence, that's when it all collapses. A lot of times, I mean, pretty much every single time there's a big collapse, it's because people lose confidence. So, yeah, I just wanted to make that clear, because I think a lot of people I've seen a lot in the media, people were cheering these stress tests, saying that, this is a sign that our financial system is strong and there's nothing to worry about. Well, I mean, if it's so strong, why are we continuing to make the test easier? Shouldn't we make the test harder? I mean, if you made the test harder, then it'll be something even more to brag about, because you can say, despite having such a hard test, the banks are still able to pass. But they can't make the test harder. They can't really have a real test. It's just something that they do. They're even telling the financial institute, they're telling all these companies what the test is going to be and how to prepare for it. So yeah, it's a complete scam. It's a fraud. All right. Anyway, so that's just what I want to talk about. Just a quick episode. We're gonna get back into things. So we're gonna continue to improve with everything that we do with this show, but we're not stopping anytime soon. I mean, if anything, this is only gonna grow faster. So yeah. Have a great day. I'll see y'all next Wednesday. Yeah. Hopefully the world doesn't end by then. Alright, anyway, I'm out.